This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is the Rockford Files. It's another in my series on great TV shows, and I have two guests who will talk about it. The Rockford Files was a 1970s detective show starring James Garner, and I have two men who will talk about it. On the top of the screen is Kevin Burton Smith. He's appeared in another show earlier, and we got a newbie in Toby Roan who will also take it on. So, as I usually like to do, I like to give the guests a few minutes to define themselves. So, Kevin, if you could kick things off with who you are and your relation to the Rockford Files.
Okay, who I am? I'm a lot of things. I guess my main claim to fame is I'm the editor and founder of the Thrilling Detective website, which is sort of just a website on fictional private eyes. It's been going on for way more years than I can count. It's celebrating its 25th anniversary next year. And I'm here to talk about one of the all-time great television shows of all time. And the Rockford Files is just the best private eye show, I think, ever. It completely jumped up my interest in the genre, and it still hasn't abated. And I'm just pleased as punch to be asked to talk about it. Over to you, Toby.
Go ahead, Toby.
Well, the name's Toby Roan. I am working advertising by day. My side stuff is I have a couple of movie blogs, 50 Westerns from the 50s, and the Hannibal 8. 50 Westerns from the 50s is pretty self-explanatory. It's about 50s Westerns. I'm writing a book with the same title. The Hannibal 8 is about movies and TV shows that I like that aren't 50s Westerns. I wrote about Rockford Files a time or two. My relation to the show comes from just watching it. I watched it when it was new, when I was, a teenager. I got into it big time when I was in college. It was on during the day on one of the local stations in Colorado. My mom would have it on in the kitchen, and the next thing I knew, that was a daily stop for me, was to watch the Rockford Files. I agree with you totally, Kevin. It is one of the greatest television shows of any type ever made. You can't beat it. And while it's certainly inspired by and patterned after Maverick, it leaves Maverick in the dust, as far as I'm concerned, big time. So that's pretty much it.
So I wanted to pick up on just something Kevin had mentioned, talking about being a great show and one of the greatest shows of all time. I'm not one of these people who subscribes to this notion of cable era television shows being the second golden age. I, in fact, did 4 or 5 years ago a show on why I thought the late 60s to the 1970s was the true golden age of television. And I think the Rockford Files, along with maybe 15 or 20 of the great sitcoms like The Odd Couple and Mary Tyler Moore and Bob Newhart, that kind of thing, to me, that was the first real attempt by television to show people in real situations, not just the standard, family sitcom. It opened things up. The characters had a deeper interior self, but it didn't get to the sort of navel gazing stage that I think a lot of the shows of the last 15, 20 years have gotten to. So let me ask you, Kevin, would you agree with my general thesis about the 70s? And if so, how does the Rockford Files fit into that thesis?
Well, I do think particularly the early 70s was a wide awakening of what television could be. I do think the current era, at least when it hasn't blown smoke up its own rear end, has offered some great television too. It's a different format. It's more long-term. Certainly things like Breaking Bad and The Sopranos and The Wire in particular have expanded what television can do. But certainly the 70s, with the rise of things like the Rockford Files, Police Story, and the sitcoms All in the Family, Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart, were another golden age. I think you can have multiple golden ages. And if you look at some of the early stuff from the 50s, which was before my time, some of the live television and some of the early stuff definitely were an expansion from just putting a radio show on television. You had people like Rod Serling and people like that push, and all those anthology shows, they all were pushing the envelope in different ways. That was a bit more than what people were expecting at the time. But certainly the Rockford Files for its era was amazing in how it was subtly covering current events and issues in a way that even now would be getting critics on their hind legs and applauding. He did, the Rockford Files covered grand jury investigations, a militant right-wing rising. I watched an episode the other week called The Battle of Canoga Park, which it could be about the January 6th mob. They're storing ammo in a real estate development. You know, this is stuff that if it was on now, people would say, oh, wow, they never used to cover it, except 40, 50 years ago, they were.
Toby,
I know, long-winded, but that's me.
Yeah. Toby, what's your take on the show and its place in the 70s and that whole milieu?
Well, I don't want to knock the shows that are on today, but I just don't care for them. I know they're very well done and well written and acted. I just don't like them. So there's that. I think kind of what Kevin was touching on, TV in the 50s was very innovative because I think they were figuring out what it could do, shifting it from, radio that you looked at to something a little different. And what I think Rockford Files did that makes it, at least for me, the reason that I keep going back to it time and time again, and why when I watched it with my mom in the kitchen every single day, thanks, Mom, it just has characters that we like. And Rockford is sort of a hub, and other characters, Angel and Gandy and whoever, sort of revolve around him. And so it becomes sort of like with Andy Griffith's show. You watching an episode of the show is like visiting friends. And I think that's when TV is really good. And that's something it has over movies, I think, is that we invite these people into our home time and time again, and we feel like we get to know them, whether that's what they're really like or not. And there's just a great welcoming thing about it. It's you're comfortable with them. That's one of the things I think is one of the show's great strengths. But TV detectives a lot of them had been sort of more. Well, there's Dragnet, which I love, but that's totally different. But a lot of the detectives were sort of more like in the Thin Man kind of category. They were pretty they were high class and very heroic and stuff. And Garner brought a more of a human thing to Rockford than other shows, and then others that things that came. I think I'm welcome, and it also has that great 70s vibe, and the location work with seeing pick some really seedy looking places from time to time. It just has a great, but it's comfortable, and trash trucks outside the house. So if it gets a little loud, I'm sorry.
So I wanted to just I want to go a little bit back further, talk about who Garner was coming into this series. But I did want to say that I think one of the things about both television and movies now is there's this assumption that darkness of a character is somehow depth of a character. And I think when you watch a Rockford and you watch Jim Rockford and his father, Rocky Rockford, and you watch Angel and these characters interacting, you could know these people. How many people are going to really know a Walter White or a Tony Soprano? And I don't want to get into the whole mafia thing, but there wasn't this necessity that depth had to be dark. I mean, Rockford is a good guy. Yes, he's an ex-con, and we'll talk about that in the setup, whatnot. But he's basically a good character. But he's a human character. He's not the knight in white armor,
Right.
Yeah, what I was going to say, and it was something that Toby had mentioned, I think also what Rockford represented was consciousness of class. In the 70s, going back to your earlier point, the early detectives, they weren't necessarily thin man types, but
Right.
you know, if you were kid like us, and we all wanted to be private eyes at one point, I think, we all probably wanted to be like Joe Mannix or Peter Gunn, you know, well-dressed, good-looking guys with fancy cars and living, you know, no one ever thought they were hustling for the next paycheck. Jim Rockford lived in a trailer that was falling apart, even when it wasn't being blown up on a regular basis. You know, we all wanted to be Peter Gunn, but in our dream life, we realized we'd probably be Jim Rockford, not getting paid for the jobs, going off on one, you know, and he got beat up every day, you know, or every week, you know. But there was a real class consciousness that came up in the 70s too. Archie Bunker was not the CEO. Mary Tyler Moore was working for a living and had to deal with office politics all the time. Bob Newhart was well off, but you could tell he was a working guy. And that's a sense of Rockford, that he was a working guy working for a living. I don't think we had that before, not in the sense that, you know, some of the earlier shows and a lot of the shows after Rockford went back to this almost fantasy figure of the private eye.
Yeah.
I mean, Magnum PI, which was basically trying to capture the Rockford vibe, it was pure male fantasy, basically. And most of us, okay, we might really like Beth, but it wasn't like Rockford. He got beat up, you know, he got stiffed by his clients all the time. His best friend was Angel. Not an ideal life.
That brings up something else that I think is one of the show's strongest points, is that it was so well put together that the propping fits the character. So everything is very character driven. Even the props, you know, Rockford drives the Firebird, but it's the base model Firebird. He's got the raggedy trailer, which he parks in the restaurant parking lot. You know, down to an episode I watched. Actually, I watched an episode this morning while I had my breakfast. Is the one that the girl from the boys club, the Bay City Boys Club, that Garner directed, where he's being followed and he pulls into the Jack in the Box drive-through and tries to get the employees to call the cops for him. I mean, even all these little things, they all either play off the character that has been established or they help build the character. And so I think that's something that, you know, of course TV shows did it, movies do it too, but they do it to a really heavy degree, and they do it better than everybody else. Everything matches the character.
Well, let's talk about Jim Garner first. Just looking up his past, you know, he was in the military. He got started in the 50s doing commercials. He I guess had the typical, did a little show here, a little show there in the early that golden age that Kevin had mentioned, and then he got Maverick. I just want to briefly touch about Maverick, because really Rockford and Maverick are the two shows that are most identified with Garner, and he never became like a super big film star when he tried to get into films. Do either one of you want to just tackle? You said, Toby, you know a little bit more about it than Kevin did, but you want to talk a little bit about Maverick for a few minutes?
Yeah, well, you know, it was in the 50s, and Western ruled West.
You just, Toby?
He's frozen.
Yeah. You froze.
Cheyenne and Maverick and others. And there's some great stuff there. And so Maverick was, you know, Garner is, he's a gambler, and his persona is very, very close to Rockford. And Kevin Huggins, not Kevin Huggins, Roy Huggins. Roy created it. Roy also wrote and directed a great Randolph Scott movie called Hangman's Knot from 1952, which is a really good 50s Western. Anyway, and so they got back together in the 70s. And so Maverick really, you know, that same sort of cynical, self-deprecating sort of humor that we see in Rockford is very, very much in Maverick. Maverick was a little different from your typical Western show. It wasn't as much of a shoot 'em up kind of show. They always had great cast. Leo Gordon was great in several episodes. They had, great directors and writers. Bud Bedecker directed a few episodes. I think he might have directed the first one. It's a show that I saw as a kid. I didn't remember that much of it. Just recently, I bought a bunch of them and have vowed to sit down and watch them. And really,
it was also Stephen J. Cannell's first hit on television, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No?
Mhm.
Rockford was not Maverick.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, Rockford. Yeah. So in the almost a decade, I guess, between the end of Maverick and Rockford, I guess he just sort of went back and forth, getting gigs here and there. And how did he get on the radar? You said Huggins had created both shows. So did he contact Garner about it? Did Garner have any input into the show that we know of?
I know he did have some. He once he attached himself to it. I mean, Rockford's name wasn't Jim. I can't remember what it was, but that was one of the things his Garner wanted to change it. But Garner's production company got involved in it, and so things like the cars and stuff. Garner was a big car guy. He got heavily involved in that and stuff like that. So he took it up. He really got very much involved once the show got going. But he did not. He wasn't there from the very beginning. It was brought to him at some point, and then he got involved from there.
Go ahead. Yeah, I think one of the things about evolution from Maverick to Rockford, it's very essential, is Roy Huggins. Roy Huggins was hugely successful as a television creator and producer, and more so as a producer. He famously would produce and get a creator's credit for the first season of all his shows, and then he would walk away. But in that time, he did Maverick, he did 77 Sunset Strip, he produced the first seasons of Bourbon Street Beat and Hawaii and I, and what was it, Run for Your Life and The Fugitive. And he part of the spoofing of the private eye genre were shows that Huggins had actually had his name attached to. I mean, you can look at especially the 77 Sunset Strip and their spin-offs. And they're what I was saying before, the male fantasy private eye, the fancy cars, the swank offices in a cute location. And so Huggins was there in the working and becoming very, very successful in the time when Garner was off starring in movies. And it wasn't his career wasn't on the big screen, was not a lost cause. He starred in some very big movies. The Americanization of Emily and The Great Escape. The only reason he was outshadowed by Steve McQueen, but other than that, Garner was the wheeler and dealer that kept the whole escape thing going. I mean, Garner was not a minor league movie star. He was a big name, and he's one of the few actors, I think, that everyone likes. He was popular from the 50s right until the time of his death, and it's hard to find someone who doesn't like James Garner.
So let's talk about the premise to the Rockford Files. We mentioned some of the characters, but I just recently rewatched the first episode, which I was surprised because I don't think I ever saw it in first run, and it had, of course, the lovely Lindsay Wagner in it. And in that show, we find out that he has an aversion to guns. He was wrongfully convicted and served some time in a state pen. He has a father who's retired, and they have if not a rocky, they have a kind of interesting relationship. I think we see Angel for the first time. So of those characters, what do we get a sense of Rockford himself as a character, Toby, if you want to go first?
Well, you get first of all, his relationship with his dad, especially as the series wore on, and Noah Beery Jr., who was not in the pilot. He just was wonderful. And so their relationship is really cool. And so you kind of learn about Rockford from the way he deals with his dad. And so that's always the episodes where Rocky has a big part is great. And Rocky had a really cool truck. But you get that, and they make reference to him being an ex-con quite a bit, and a lot of times they say that he was paroled, and he'll correct them and say that he was pardoned. So he makes a big deal about that. He's not supposed to carry a gun because of being an ex-con, so he keeps it in. He hides it. It's not registered. It's in the cookie jar in his trailer. Again, all these things kind of go to his back to his character. He's got his friend Becker at the police station, and a lot of the characters, the recurring characters that he keeps bumping into, Angel and Gandhi and some of the others, are people he knew from prison, and so we're always of that life, and you can tell that he learned a lot. His street smarts, a lot of it seems to have come from dealing with people in jail. In the pilot episode, the original Rocky, I can't remember the guy's name who played him, but Rocky was a bit of a hustler too.
Yeah.
He wasn't, and where later he was more of an up and up retired truck driver. And I think that was a wise move to make his dad more of an upstanding guy. And again, the retired truck driver, there's that class issue that we talked about. There's that coming back. And then Rockford hangs out with a lot of his, folks from prison. Again, there's the class issue there. His girlfriend, the attorney, a lot of times, he's not very comfortable in her world. And when he comes into those sorts of situations, you can tell he's a little ill at ease in it. So I don't know if I really answered your question there, but it was fun to talk about him.
Kevin, what is your take on the setup to the whole series?
Well, I think as the show evolved, they wore into their roles, like breaking in a pair of new shoes. I think the pilot is really a pair of brand new shoes that still sort of pinch in places. Mm-hmm. But within a few months of the show, I think it had already started to evolve into what we now think of as classic Rockford. The relationship with Rocky, the relationship with Beth, which is on again, off again. I think the whole relationship between them sort of mellows into just good friends. And if you want to stretch beyond the Rockford Files series, the 8 made-for-television movies they brought out in, I think it was the 90s, that were trying to turn into a franchise themselves. It's amazing, and partly due to Garner's sense of teamwork, and that almost all the original cast members all showed up for those made-for-television movies, most of the writers and producers, and each one revisited the relationships with those characters. I mean, it's rare to see one of these bring them back from the dead series of made-for-TV movies that have nothing to do with the original series. Yeah. The Perry Mason movies, it was almost a completely different show. Whereas the Rockford File television movies, there was an honest attempt to say, this is what these characters would be like 20 years later. And
even the Firebird is parked and needing to be fixed up, but it's there. And
yes, like he can no longer live in a trailer that was rusting away 20 years earlier. So, they've evolved in ways that make sense. It's not like suddenly Beth is a time-traveling warrior queen on Planet X or something. There's a sense that these are the guys. And the very first film was dedicated to the memory of Noah Beery Jr. There's that sense of family and friends in the TV movies that was there almost from the beginning of the Rockford Files. Mm-hmm. You know that Angel is a pain in the ass, but Jim will be there for him because they're friends. You see it when he stands up for Gandalf, who calls him Rockfish, and you see it with Dennis, and you see it with all these characters. They show up again and again. It's a family. You know, you may not get along with your cousin Bob, but you'll be there for Thanksgiving dinner at his place.
Right.
You know, there's sense of family. And I think that went beyond the cast to the writers and directors, and who the writers, by the way, are the ones that created this current golden age of television.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them cut their teeth on the Rockford Files.
Yep.
If you look at the writing credits, because I'm a geek, I do, you see the same names still showing up in many cases.
Yep.
So before we take a break and then come back and hit some of the major episodes and the thematic developments that happened during the course of the series, I do want to talk about two of the iconic things that when you say Rockford Files, they initially come up. One is the theme song, which was an interesting, or I should say even the opening theme, because it's an interesting visuals too. And then, of course, the answering machine that ends that. So we have the, I don't know, what would we even call it? I guess jazzy score, bum bum ba ba bum bum, and then we see, and we don't see, you know, the action scenes that we'd see sometimes in 1960s Mission Impossible, you know, characters with freeze frame, you know, and whatnot. It's just you know, little vignettes, and then we get the answering machine. So Toby, if you want to go first on that.
Okay. Well, the titles almost seem like, I was kind of thought of them as almost a spoof of the Hawaii Five-0 titles, where the you know, the cuts on the beat and the little flashes of stuff to sort of set the scene, but instead of, you know, the hula dancers and the surfers and all that kind of stuff from Hawaii Five-0, you have Garner in the grocery store, and
like,
you know,
Mary
in the
Tyler
blurred
Moore
picture.
I think he throws a little package of meat just like Mary Tyler Moore does in her opening.
Yeah. And so I thought, and, you know, and again, I can't beat this horse enough, is that everything just keeps coming back to character with this show. You know, everything is just dead on. So, you know, I love the answering machine thing, because again, it does the same thing. You know, there's the drive call and somebody that he owes money calls, and, you know, there's a check that bounced. Yeah, it just, they're wonderful. And, you know, there's a few rare ones that actually sort of either refer to a previous episode or actually relate to that particular episode. But most of them are just, you know, crazy stuff that comes out of the blue. But they all help, you know, define that character. So that's great. And the score, I wish they had done a CD or record of the score other than the 45 of it, because it's wonderful, of the theme, because it's wonderful.
I think there is one out there somewhere. Some European company has done.
Well, I'm going to start looking as soon as we get done here, because I want it desperately. Because, you know, it's great.
Yeah. Look up Mike Post and Pete Carpenter.
Yeah, I have the 45, you know, that came out in the 70s, and then they made an album of those two guys, of just a compilation of stuff, and it's got, like, I think it's just got the theme on it. But anyway, the music is wonderful, and it has, you know, the harmonica and other things that come into it. Again, it all just sort of, everything fits so well with this show. And you know, back to something you said earlier, Kevin, is I can't think of a show that found its sweet spot as fast as this one did. Yeah. You know, most shows take, you know, sometimes an entire season to really settle in, moving well. You know, like Andy Griffith, Andy himself, he hated the way he played in the first season. So from second one on, he approached his character a little different. So, but this one, you know, within, you know, it just took a couple of, and it was just really humming. But the opening is really important, and it was something that, you know, people look forward to, and it does help set the scene. I mean, everything. I just everything just fits so well with the show.
It's a quirky song. You wouldn't know it's supposedly an action show. Not that it's really an action show, but you wouldn't know it's a detective show from the theme. And, you know, you mentioned Hawaii Five-0, and I was just thinking, you know, I love the original Hawaii Five-0 as a kid, and then I just recently saw an episode on lunch break one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And it's
I'm
terrible.
sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it it's like the latest Bond movies. I saw that one of Daniel Craig's Bond movies opening for 45 minutes. It's just nothing but chase. There's nothing. And this Hawaii Five-0 is the same thing, even using a Bowdlerized theme song. But anyway, to get back to the good stuff, Kevin, what is your comment about the opening and the answer machine?
Well, if you close your eyes and try and picture what images would be going there, it would be car chases and fist fights and all that. And then you open it and there's a guy on the phone smoking a cigarette and he's in the grocery store. And it took me years to realize when he's looking at that, whatever it is, probably a pack of pork chops or something in the grocery store, we all have this image of him flipping it back in the bin. It never happens. No. It's just the expression on his face and the way he's holding it. He doesn't throw that package of pork chops back. And I think that's part of it. As I said, it just, like the messages, it puts him in his place. You know, you see a scene of him with his car driving by in Bel Air or Beverly Hills on the road sign, but then you see him laughing with his dad and they're standing on a pier fishing. You know, you never saw Joe Mannix mowing his lawn, you know, but, you know, Peter Gunn was not there doing his laundry. Jim Rockford, he's like, it's not, he looks like he's not cool in that. I mean, he is cool in a way that goes beyond image, but he looks like just like I said, the Joe Everyman. He's the everyday dick, you know, he's not the big shot guy there. He's just not satisfied with the pork chops, you know, that's who he is. Yeah. And the messages just hammer that message home. You know, he can be saving the day and winning the girl. He never won the girl, really, except for a few times. But you know that he's probably not going to get paid, and he's going to find out that it cost him more to do the job than he made, or, you know, and it's that constant theme of him just, he's rolling that boulder up the hill all the time, you know, and after a while, we all wanted to help him push it up. That's what Rockford was.
Yeah, I think in the opening episode, he does get to score with Lindsay Wagner, but that's a very, you know, that's atypical of what was to come.
Episode. Yeah. So okay. Well, and he went out with the blind psychologist, and that seemed really, yeah, okay. Jim's finally getting some. About time.
So let us turn to the first season. We'll talk about, you know, if there's any favorite or really excellent shows that highlight, you know, Angel's Pass or something that you want to talk about. Let's bring that up. You said, Toby, that you can't think of any show that hit its stride so quickly, at least a drama show so quickly as this. Where is there a particular episode that stands out as this is where, oh, this is going to be something good, you know, as a series?
Well, you know, and I'm terrible. They have really goofy titles, so I'm really terrible with the titles of the episodes. You know, there's a really obvious, you know, the pilot with, you know, a different Rocky. So that one's really easy. But, you know, I can't really. A lot of people make a big deal about the third season as that being the best season, but I think later in the first and certainly by the second, they were there. Maybe the writing, you know, was more consistently good in the third or whatever, but they were there. I mean, the plots are great. They're not obvious, but they're not, you know, there's not some bombshell 10 minutes before the episode's over to put it somewhere. You know, they do make sense. They were very good with the plots and how it all played out. But as far as episodes, I can't really think of any that I particularly, you know, that point to this is the one where they got it. Like I said, I just have watched it over the years, and so keeping track of episodes is more like the one where this happens versus the title of an episode.
Exactly what I was saying. I can think of a lot of episodes that I loved, but the titles,
Yeah, the titles are crazy.
Well,
And
let's talk about. Give me a couple of examples, Kevin.
The one where the family from the Midwest in their giant camper park on the beach near Rockford's trailer, and he's involved in some recovery of, I think it's diamonds or something, where they've agreed to, for some reason, bury the diamonds in Rockford's barbecue. And this family from the Midwest, the mopey teenage son, is told to clean out their barbecue, but instead he grabs Rockford's barbecue and steals it rather than clean his, which also had ashes. But anyways, this family takes off, not realizing they have a fortune in diamonds in their barbecue that the teenager threw in the back of the camper. And Rockford has to chase them all over the coast of California trying to find them. The episodes where he fell in love with the blind psychologist, I loved. The one with the would-be psychic who keeps trying to worms his way into an investigation of Rockford's, and he somehow knows everything that Rockford's about to announce, and it ends up, the end result is that Rockford's looking at murder charges because of this psychic going around. The one where he deals with the new age hippie type she's at a commune and she's following this guru and that guru, and she gets involved in some weird shakedown with a record company guy. But at the very end, I think she gets slapped, and Rockford says, "There, that's the sound of one hand clapping." It's just the episode with the grand jury investigation where Rockford is called in to testify and he's hung out to dry by the whole.
That's a really good one. That's a really good one.
The ones with Richie Brockelman, the junior PI who looks on Rockford as an idol, and you have to say
the ones with James Whitmore Jr. The one with James Whitmore Jr. as the mechanic that wants to be the private investigator.
To touch on that, he shows up in one of the episodes with Tom Selleck as the perfect private eye, which was possibly the best parody of Roy Huggins' entire private eye career, because he's the absolute perfect private eye who is so annoying. I could never enjoy Magnum PI because I thought his portrayal of Lance White was far superior. I mean, he is so absolutely perfect. The only thing they didn't have was every time he smiled, it didn't go ding.
Yep. Garner was wonderful playing off of him like that. Just his the slow burn he did as he just watched everything fall into place for him.
Say like, Lance, like, don't worry, Jim, something will show up. And you say, Lance, it doesn't work that way. And all of a sudden the phone rings. What? The suspect's where? And they're off, It was just perfect. Those were great. I think it's the 4th or 5th season, but those ones where they had all the private eyes at some awards ceremony where Jim is actually going to win an award for his detective skills. And everyone thinks it should have gone to Lance White because he's the perfect private eye. And there's a recount at the end, and they strip Garner of the award and give it to Lance White, because all Rockford did was some tedious number crunching investigation that finally figured out who was guilty. But Lance White saved some orphans from a fire or something. It was just perfect.
Now, when you mentioned Lance White, it brought to mind, and then you mentioned Richie Brockman. Brockleman actually got a short-lived spin-off, but wasn't Magnum PI supposed to originally be Lance White as a spin-off?
I wish it had been.
Yeah, it would have been more interesting.
But it would have been an inner baseball thing. You'd have to know what they were parodying.
Yeah.
Most people, not everyone's a private eye geek like me. Like, I get the jokes, but after a while, you couldn't run a parody forever and ever.
Right, because he'd be the anti-Rockford. Rockford is charming because he's so imperfect.
Yes.
This guy would just be annoying because he is
Well, speaking
There'd be
of,
no conflict.
Yeah, there'd be no
From episode to
conflict. It
episode.
would be, don't worry, something will turn up. I'm on it. And the show would be 4 minutes long every week. They couldn't do it.
yeah.
Right.
Speaking of imperfect, I wanted to talk about the Angel as a character, because the 1970s shows always had, especially the drama and TV cop shows type, they always had the kind of person that the heroes went to. It was like Huggy Bear in Starsky and Hutch, I think it was. Wasn't it Huggy Bear was the name of the
Yeah.
character? Yeah. And so Angel, in a sense, is sort of a low rent Huggy Bear. Either one of you, how about you, Kevin? Do you want to talk about the character of Angel and how his relationship changes or doesn't change to Rockford?
Yeah. Angel's like the North Star. He's constant. He's just, it says something like one of the themes of the Rockford Files has to be loyalty to friends, to family. Because if they had met in the series, not as like they were cellmates, I believe.
Yes.
If they had met in the series, they wouldn't have become friends, probably, because he's the exact opposite of Garner. Garner is a wheeler and dealer, yes, and a bit of a con artist. And you know that when he talks about he was in Vegas, you know he was probably gambling and maybe has a little edge on something. And as you can see he's not adverse to con jobs. But Angel is fully in that life. There is very, very little redeeming quality to Angel at all. And yet, because they were friends, they remain friends through thick and thin. And that's Rockford's character. He's loyal.
Yep.
Yep.
And there's no reason at all for him to be loyal to Angel.
No, there is not.
It's either screws him over,
Angel didn't
or
steal the
fail
trailer
every time.
It's
Remember the episode where the guy the assassin who doubles as a coin dealer is coming in to try to kill Rockford and he's hiding out he's got that little duplex that he's using instead of his trailer. And Angel is there, and he's hiding the assassin is crawling through the window, almost steps on Angel, which of course which blows the whole thing. It's just every single time that there's something that Angel can do to screw up everything, he does.
Yes.
The only thing you can count on him for is to do the wrong thing.
And yet Jim comes in and tries to save him every time. And no one did exasperation better than Garner.
No, he's the king of the slow burn. Absolutely.
Yeah, the slow burn, like Angel. It's just Angel.
And that's I think that's what makes those Lance White episodes so strong, is not just, is his reaction to Lance is what makes it. It's not Lance himself.
The only way
the parody of the detective show was great.
Last is if Jim Garner was a guest star every week.
Yeah, exactly. That would have made it work.
I always thought that the character of Angel was sort of the Rockford Files Gilligan, in that he always was fucking things up. He couldn't ever get anything right. If they had been stuck on the island, he would have been the one who was constantly sinking whatever the escape plans the professor came up with.
Yeah. Hearing the Rock Files, Gilligan's Island. What's next?
Anytime that Angel shows up when you're watching an episode and Angel pops up, you just automatically get a smile on your face. Oh, cool. Angel's in this one.
Yeah.
So that's great. And Angel Stuart Margolin was certainly in on the whole thing because he directed quite a few episodes and some of the better ones. So, he definitely got what the show was about and got the vibe and the character and he did a great job.
Side note, after the Rockford Files, Stephen J. Cannell moved his television production up to Vancouver, and Margolin moved up too. And within a few years, he was starring in a Canadian half sitcom, half drama called Mum PI, about a mom with 2 small children who gets hired by a con artist private eye as his assistant, and it's played by Margolin. And it's an excellent little show that was like a half hour long, and everything was based on the idea of things are not what they seem. They would,
Right.
she, as the assistant, would follow the wrong person, but it would somehow end up being the crime her boss was investigating, things like that. Sidebar over, sorry for the digression.
No, I want to see it. I have to check that out. I think he's great. He's wonderful in this show.
And he was a noted director too. He had won, I think, an Emmy back in the 50s for a television show he had directed.
Really?
Yeah.
So let's.
Or maybe he acted. He did something in the 50s. He won an award. That's it.
So let's talk about Rocky, Jim Rockford's father. We mentioned him a bit earlier. They have an interesting relationship too, and that's one of the things with the show is it's more about how the cases affect the relationships than the cases themselves. Toby, if you want to talk about Rocky Rockford.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Noah Beery Jr. was a wonderful character actor. He's in a lot of westerns, and I'm a big western nut, and so he's always good. He's just great. So, it helps that he was, just good to begin with. But there's episodes where he sort of the episode sort of begins with him, or he's the launching pad for what happens. Like the one where there's the country singer that has the sausage company that Rocky's a big fan of the guy, and so Rocky stays attached to it in that way. And so he just was really wonderful. And I wish that I guess everybody wishes that their relationship with their dad was like Rocky and Rockford. It's just ideal. They just get along. They help each other out. They don't have, that much trouble, and everything. They hang out and fish a lot, stuff like that. It's just, just like real life, and a really great version of real life. But yeah, the episodes where there's ones where, Garner has to borrow his truck because the Firebird is torn up or whatever. There's a lot of those. I also like the ones where Rockford has to ride the bus. Those are always good. I think when you watch a family and they're fairly close like that, and you end up bringing them into your day-to-day life, give me a ride to the doctor or whatever, that stuff is very real, and it really helps that sort of show how their relationship works by sort of bringing it. It's not just he shows up to help crack the case or whatever. A lot of the cases sort of move along with day-to-day life, and I think that's something that it's not like a regular PI show. It kind of, it's lumpy and bumpy like real life, and the case affects the day-to-day life, and day-to-day life affects the case, and all those kinds of things. And a lot of shows don't do that. Certainly not something like Dragnet, where it's just all all business,
Yeah.
no fluff. But it's just fluid and real. And Rocky, I think, is a major part of that whole thing that it has going.
What is your take on the father character, Kevin?
It pretty much what Toby says. I mean, Rocky is probably television's ultimate father figure. I don't know, maybe the dad in the Waltons, but that's I can't think of many other father figures that are so integral a part of the show.
Yeah, and it seems so real.
It seems real. It seems adult. It's not this sort of adolescent angsty thing that is so common where, it's well, there was a respect, like even though they're often at loggerheads because, Jim, when are you getting a real job? Or Jim, you said you'd go fishing with me. Or Jim, come help me plant a garden in my backyard. It's 6 a.m. It's time to go. It's like,
right.
There's this And once again, Rockford being exasperated. Dad, you know, it's just a constant, but it's a real constant. I mean, you know, we choose our friends, we don't choose our family, you know.
Right.
But there's that whole sense of, it's like, I realize I keep saying it, but loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
It's, and I think that sense of family, whether it's the family of relatives or family of friends, is a constant in every level of the show.
Yeah.
If you read the credits, it's all the same people over and over again. And the cast, even ones that you haven't seen for a while, they wander back in. I think it's the second season or something that Beth and Rockford just sort of move apart. But she comes back over the season. They're not forgotten. They're part of that circle. And yeah. I think that's what makes it work. And Rocky is like the most clear example of that. He's a constant.
Yeah. Well, we also, I think it's important, like comparing him to the dad and the Waltons. The Waltons is so idealized.
Yes.
And it's wholesome entertainment and all that other kind of stuff. And it tugs at your heartstrings and stuff, but it's never believable. No. Even its portrayal of what Depression era life was like, it's not believable. But Rockford, we see these characters' flaws. We see their flaws more often than we see their good points. But, they stick together and they count on each other and they help each other out regardless. Garner knows every time he needs to bring Angel in for something, it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
It's a given. But he does it anyway.
And he doesn't even necessarily call him in. He just shows up in the middle.
Yeah.
He's running a scam or something, and Angel will walk in. Hi, Jim Garner. Hi, Jim Rockford, the private eye. How are you doing? It's just.
Yep.
I wanted to talk about a couple of characters that were just briefly mentioned, and I was just looking it up. The Gandy and Gabby characters.
Randolph Fitch.
Yeah, and they were for their time very unique black characters. They weren't, they were fully realized to a certain degree. What is your take on those two characters? They almost got a spin-off from what I read.
Yeah, one later episode was I guess it was sort of intended to be a pilot for whatever.
Yeah, pilot.
And it didn't happen. But both of them, I think again, so much of it is the writing, but a lot of it is the actors. I mean, Isaac Hayes, he wasn't even an actor. He was a musician, but
yes, but he had done the theme for Shaft.
He'd done Shaft, and he made a movie. He started a movie called Truck Turner that's actually quite good.
Yeah.
And then later, of course, Escape from New York. But Isaac Hayes is just great. He's great. He looks cool. He talks cool. He's big. And he just was perfect.
Yeah.
And the character was so well written. It just was perfect for him. And I think the same thing with Lou Gossett. He had done the Skin Game. And so we kind of, him as that sort of, kind of smarmy, he's got a con going as well, was just perfect. I mean, those guys were just, everything was always, I guess because so much of it was people who had worked together, whether it was Maverick or in Gossett's case, Skin Game and stuff. Everybody kind of knew each other. They knew what everybody's strong points were. So the episodes are always built around what somebody's really good at, and they let them do what they're good at. Yeah. And it just, so they set themselves up to succeed before they ever did anything, just because they knew what to do and how to use people. And those guys are classic examples. I mean, Isaac Hayes, you would never know that he had done very, very little before that, because he's wonderful.
Yeah, the Hammer of C Block.
Yeah. Hammer of C Block.
I remember the title of that one. Yeah, by that point, the whole Shaft and the blaxploitation thing was all over the place. And I think Cannell wanted to create his own black private eye. And that's why he tried to spin off Gandalf and Marcus into their own series. He later went on to do a show called Sunny Spoon, and another one, 10 Speed and Brown Shoe, both of which featured sort of black characters who were a little loose on the law sometimes, sort of like Rockford. Rockford wasn't a Boy Scout. He was willing to cut corners and stuff. The number of times, even when he wasn't running an elaborate con game, when he would slightly misrepresent himself, Hi, I'm Billy Bob, from Houston. I need an oil well dug here. I hear you're the man to talk to. I mean, he was those scams and the running around with
those are the better episodes, I think, where he's got to do the scam.
I forget which episode, but he's passing himself off as someone, and he prints out the business card in his little printing press in the car, and then he hands the card to the guy, and the guy runs his thumb over it. The ink's still wet. It's like, yeah, you're thinking, boy, he's so smart, he's so sly, and he gives someone a card with the ink still smudgy. It's part of the whole thing that Jim was not perfect.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit more about Rockford, Jim Rockford's character, the character, because in the mid to late 70s, when this show is in its heyday, two actors that were always oddly kind of contrasted, because they were talked about the new kind of masculinity being open to the feminine side, were Alan Alda's Hawkeye and Garner's Jim Rockford. And I never found, I remember seeing a whole Phil Donahue show about just that subject, along with a couple of other characters that I've now forgotten. But I think one of the things that made the Rockford Files great was that, when I was talking earlier about a lot of the shows, with the Tony Sopranos, Walter White types, is that people now turn that toxic masculinity. I've seen many articles written about that. Whereas when you look at, you talked about the Rockford's allegiance to Angel, despite Angel's not deserving it. To me, that's the best. That's there's a brotherhood. There's a familial kind of thing. These guys are often, a lot of times these characters, they portray, I think, the best of male bonding, if you want to call it. Do either of you have any insight on that, perhaps? Go ahead, Toby, if you got it.
Oh, well.
Go ask my wife what I should say. No, I don't think of, despite the fact, the broad shoulders and the strong chin and all that, I don't think Rockford was an alpha male particularly, because, and this goes beyond television to the private eye genre in books as well. There was a sudden acceptance of private eyes having an adult relationship that I don't think was seen very often in the genre. You'd have to go back to the 50s on television to see Peter Gunn and his girlfriend. But there was always a sense, even though Beth seems and the blind psychologist seem to be the only women that Rockford dated for more than one episode, there was always this sense of respect, and that often wasn't the case. Like you'd see Mannix or someone from 77 Sunset Strip, and it was the plot convenient girlfriend who was either getting, or the old girlfriend who shows up and gets murdered or kidnapped.
Yeah.
But with Rockford, there was this sense that the women he was dating, he was genuinely interested in them, and they weren't being forced into a corner. So there may be a contrast with Hawkeye, but and I don't think Hawkeye was particularly soft in that he had a hell of a job, more than a private eye living in a trailer on the beach, He was under constant pressure. I'm not sure if I buy the idea. I realize what you're saying about the feminization of males, but I never thought of Garner as being Tarzan. I mean, if you look at the literature, this was the same time Bill Pronzini's Nameless Detective and Robert B. Parker Spencer were both becoming popular, and both of them had long-term relationships with real adult women. There were very few bimbos on the Rockford Files.
Yeah, Well, they didn't seem to find it necessary to nail a woman to each episode.
Right.
Where, if there is one, that's cool. If there's not, that's cool too. And so it always feels really real. How people come and go from each episode or from the show in general always feels really natural,
Yeah.
rather than, it's, um the detective is sitting in his desk and the phone rings, there's a knock on the door and the, femme fatale walks in. There's none of that. It's all real, quirky, and again, I feel like we're just repeating ourselves over and over, but the idea, it's just more like life really works,
Yeah.
rather than the conventions of the detective genre or TV in general, or any kind of plotting. It just stuff just happens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
speaking of conventions, one of the differences between the '70s and now is that almost all television shows try to be serialized. You
Yeah.
know, even as soap operas as a genre is slowly fading away in this country, at least. Yet back then, when it was episodic, there was Rockford Files struck sort of a middle ground because oftentimes the episodes would seemingly end in medias res. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, something, I forgot, I forgot this thing there, and you'd get, not often, but you'd get these kind of references to things that happened in the past, even though it wasn't a direct through line. So it sort of
Right.
struck a middle balance. What is, both of you, I'll start with you, Kevin. What is your take on what I would consider the over serialization of all shows now versus the almost total episodic structure back then, and how Rockford was in the middle somehow?
Yeah. I must admit, some of those serializations I love. I love The Wire. I really love the Breaking Bad, and some of them had gone on for a while. I think there's a problem in feeding the beast. There are
Yeah.
shows on Netflix and Amazon and all the others that don't need 18 episodes or 13 episodes. I mean, the story should be as long as it needs to be. I've seen plenty of these shows that they're good, but they could have told it in 4 episodes or 3 or 2 or 1. We don't need to have 13 episodes. But there are also a lot of TV shows that are still episodic. Uh, Look, the British streaming services and the what is it, MHC, which offers foreign language mysteries. There's still a lot of episodic mysteries. The Rockford Files was weird in that sometimes the plots were too intense for 60 minutes, and they seem to be cut off quickly. And other ones, this is part of the problem of all television, whether it's the 70s or the 90s. Some of the Rockford Files episodes were padded. There's no doubt that some of those, there's an awful lot of shots of James Garner driving that Firebird up and down the highways of mostly the Antelope Valley north of Los Angeles, where I live now. I'm watching it. My wife, who grew up here, will say, oh, that's Bouquet Canyon. Oh, they're in Palmdale. Oh, they're in Lancaster. I mean, they filmed all those scenes right here, but those are padding out some of the episodes. So, yes, there are series that go on and on and on, and then they do a prequel and a sequel and another one. You just have to turn on like the Disney Channel and see how you can milk one idea forever.
Yeah.
Or go to the theater where the Avengers Part 18 goes, where a bunch of quirky superheroes trade banter while saving the world once more. I mean,
Well, those kinds of that stuff where there's a heavy through line like that seems to it puts a big obligation on the audience.
oh yeah,
If you happen upon a show midstream, you don't have a clue what's going on a lot of times. You got the plot of the episode, but a lot of the relationships and things that they might mention make no sense. Where with something like the Rockford File, if you've never seen it and you turn on episode from the middle of season 3, you were going to be okay. The more you watched, the more you got it, and the more you understood the relationship. But it wasn't going to have a lot of stuff where your brain's trying to fill in some gaps. And as we know, when you have to do that, it's a big toll on the audience, and it hurts a show. Nowadays, if people get into a show, they decide to all right, I'm gonna binge watch the second season this week because the third season starts in a few weeks. You didn't need to do that with these things. They just stand alone just fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a question of the era because episodic television still exists. Mm-hmm. There's a new Private Eye show on now called So Help Me Todd, and it's supposed to be sort of quirky and funny, but and it's got a great premise that a young private eye has lost his license, and he eventually goes to work for his mom, who's a lawyer, and he'll be her investigator. And it's got a decent cast, and the plots are so boring. It's like there's nothing there. They've got a premise, they've got a good cast. Let's see what they can do. So far, nothing. But it's complete self-contained episodes with a slight follow-through that is so far not working for me. And there's 1,000 of them out there that are episodic in nature. And once again, I say with the Rockford File, it's just a perfect meeting of great writing, great direction, and a great cast and a great lead.
It is.
So
it really is.
It was a perfect storm.
Let's talk about the end. From what I was reading, Garner had some medical issues with his knees, and he just felt he was too old for the role, or that kind of a role, and so they ended it. How did it end within the universe? And let's put aside the TV movies 20 years later. The actual series. How did it end? And we mentioned the pardon. Was it the last episode that he received the pardon?
No, there was no finale.
No, he was pardoned before the show started, I think, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was?
I remember right.
Yeah, there was no finale. It just stopped.
It just stopped. And there was a whole season to be done, but because of the delays due to Garner's physical stuff, they just pulled the plug on it. What's weird is that all those recurring characters, they are not in the last couple of episodes. I don't think that wasn't by design. It just ended up that way. And so last episode to have all those common characters and all those interactions is a couple of episodes from the end. So that one sort of, in a way, you'd sort of like for that one to at least have been the last, even though there is no grand finale.
Yeah.
But in a way, it just stopping kind of works because you just figure that life like that was just going to keep on chugging along for those folks. Yeah. And
which is what happened with the TV movies. They just said, went on.
Exactly. It works.
Apparently, Garner he did most of his own stunts. Mm-hmm. He did a lot of the driving. He taught some of the younger stunt drivers how to do one of those turns.
The J turn?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And apparently, Garner went for a checkup or something, and he was in his mid-50s, maybe. And the doctor said he had the knees of an 85-year-old man. So he took that as a sign to get out.
Yeah. If you watch those episodes where he runs or climbs steps or something, he looks like he's having a hard time. He does not look, he's a big strapping guy, but evidently you can tell he was having problems with his knees.
I'm just glad that they didn't have a final episode, some conclusive thing, because I remember his last TV show had a definite ending. You know it too, Nichols.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Yeah, that definitely had a conclusion.
That's a sadly overlooked show. I liked that show.
Yeah. Had Margot Kidder in there too, so.
That's right, it did.
Yeah. So let's wrap this up, and let me start with you, Toby, and then I'll go to Kevin. Why is we've said it before, but why is the Rockford Files great, and why should someone who is just watching this and has never even heard of it, why should they go and see it? for the first time?
Well, I love it. I have the attachment, personal attachment to having watched it with my mom when I was younger. That's a big part of it for me. That was, and um, I just think that the things that are necessary to make a good long running series, no matter what it's about, whether it's a Western or a comedy it has all of those things. It does everything right. From the acting and the just, building a show around an established actor that people kind of halfway have an idea what their persona is before the show even starts. They just did it right. And it was a show that didn't fizzle out like so many shows did. The later seasons maybe aren't quite as good, but they're not bad. And they don't get ridiculous, or they didn't saddle Rockford with the baby or something in order to try to inject a little life into it. They just did their thing and they kept on going with it. So more power to them for that. But it's a good look at what the 70s looked like, from the clothes to the cars to the locations. I mean, it just looks real. And I think that the real relationships, everything about it, that reality, that is what makes it. I mean, it's like turning on the TV and spending 50 minutes with some friends. I think that's what its appeal is. But then you say, look at what it led to. I think a lot of shows tried to inject a little bit of that sort of naturalist sort of relationship stuff into the detective shows that came later. Some of them did it pretty well, and some of them did a terrible job at it. But I think it kind of was influential in that way as well. And then look at where all the people who worked on it, how they continued to do, great things, and they sort of helped, guide the evolution of detective shows on TV for even maybe still. It did some amazing work. And the fact that people still watch it and love it, and that we're sitting here talking about it today. I mean, it's over 20 years since the reunion shows were done. So, I mean, obviously it has a staying power and an attraction that people just naturally, are growing, people like. And good. And in the end, it's just a good show.
Kevin, same question to you. Why is it great, and why should someone who has never seen it or heard of it watch it?
Okay, why is it great? Because it is great. It's one of the all-time great television shows. If you like great television, watch it. See what can be done. Every other show has the same parts: writers, directors, actors, scripts, commercials every 15 minutes, whatever. All television shows have that. But in this case, it was great concept, great writers to keep it going, and it was a nucleus of great writers. They were the same ones. It was great direction and a great cast and a great lead. It all worked together, and the same qualities that I keep hitting on, the thing about friend and family, that permeated every level of the show. You see the same names over and over and over. So if you like great television, it's a great show to watch. If you like crime and mystery and detective stuff, if you read it, if you whatever, it's also important to note that not only did Rockford influence subsequent television, it influenced the literary part of the genre. As I said before, in the early 70s, there was this awakening of the private eye to more concepts. Stuff that had been hinted at since the 50s took full bloom in the early 70s with the arrival of different types of characters. And, you saw a breakingness. It just worked. As I said, there was Bill Pronzini's Nameless, Robert B. Parker Spencer, and Roy Huggins and Stephen J. Cannell's Jim Rockford. They all came out within a few years of each other, and they all expanded the genre in ways that hadn't been seen, and it began an evolution that is continuing to this day. Without Rockford and Spencer and the nameless detective of Bronzini, the genre might have been a very different thing. Within a few years, there were suddenly black private eyes and women private eyes and gay private eyes. This was all coming out of the same explosion where boundaries were falling apart. And Rockford is easily the most accessible part of that, because I think it's in syndication on half the channels in the country, and it's streaming on like 4 or 5 streaming channels for free. Can't beat the price. They're chopped up a bit because they have to fit in commercials and that, but it's just a great, great show. Watch it. And if
Kevin,
you don't like it, it's all Dan's fault and Toby's, not mine.
Well, Kevin, let me ask you a question. Maybe you'll know. Are the Rockford novels any good? I have them, and I've never read them.
Okay, the 2 novelizations are basically what you've already seen. The 2 by Stuart Kaminsky, once, but The Green Bottle on My Footsteps or something. It's excellent.
Cool.
Stuart Kaminsky wrote 2, and I think I've read them both, but in one of them, it's done in first person, and it's excellent. If you're a Rockford fan, you'll love it. If you're not a Rockford fan, maybe reading this book will encourage you to rewatch all 5 seasons.
Well, that's great, because I have them and I won't pull them out.
I have a question, though. Was there ever a show in the 60s or 70s that wasn't novelized? I mean, it seems like every goddamn show from that era has a novelization.
Well, it was a big thing. Max Allan Collins, I think he's the winner in that, because he wrote a graphic novel called The Road to Perdition, which was adopted into a film with Tom Hanks and Paul Newman. And they asked him to write the novelization. So he wrote the novelization of the movie that was based on a book he had written before. I think he should write a novelization of the documentary about writing the novelization of the movie that was based on. But that's Max. He may already have that in the works.
Well, I want to thank both of you for spending over an hour talking about the Rockford Files. I'll link to both of your websites below this video. So thank you, Toby, and thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Dan.
Sure. Well, leave a message at the beep. I'll get back to you.
Okay, good one.